Welcome to this wonderful rebellious research seminar, where we have the most amazing rebel with a cause, Charlotte Croft, Dr. Charlotte Croft, the cinematographer with a brain the size of a planet, which is really wonderful. And she will be talking about hopefully her practice and research, and sharing with us all of that, and also hopefully targeting sort of ideas and top tips and handy hints for us early stage or shy researchers that that most of us seem to be. Charlotte's coming from Bristol at the moment. She's beaming in from Bristol. And is attached to University of the West of England, that's right. And we're really honoured to have her here to share this information. And if you haven't been here before, what happens is that the speaker, Charlotte, the presenter, will present for about 45 minutes, an hour, and then we normally have questions for half an hour afterwards. However, we've had an earlier chat, and looks like she's being dragged away because she's actually not in her office, although it looks like it. What we will do is, if people want to ask her or have discussions about certain things, because I think it's quite fluid, then please just either put your hand up or put a question in the chat. I'll try and follow the chat as we're going along, or just a bit like a cafe, just interrupt and how if it's not, I'll put my rounded woolen Scottish hat of the chair on, and if it isn't appropriate, I will have to sort of press the button of not appropriate situation. But hopefully it will be a lovely time, and thank you so much for coming. Also, just to say that this is recorded, so if you're not happy about that or you don't want to be, please let us know at the end, and then I'll pass it on to Agatha, who is the main proponent of this, and she's not here at the moment, so we'll have to sort of get our handkerchiefs out and be sad for that. But anyway, on to the good things. I present to you Dr. Charlotte Crofts.
Hey. So hello everybody, can you hear me? I am beaming in from the photocopying room of a conference venue because I'm on a training away day, and somebody just came in, got some photocopying, and I said, I'm doing a presentation. He said, this is my office. So they very kindly let me use the photocopying room. So then photocopying may start at any moment and people may come in, and we'll try not to get distracted. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm very impressed by everything that Agatha's doing to bring this research seminar together, and to really think about practice and to try and make it accessible to people that may not have their heads around it yet. So I'm hoping I can contribute to that. It is kind of death by PowerPoint, but also I'm very interruptible. I'll keep an eye on the chat because I've got two screens. And so if there's anything that's not clear or you want to comment on, I might respond immediately, or we can pick that up in the conversation afterwards. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully, can you see a presentation with somebody jumping about? Okay, so I've chosen to call this Rebel with a Cause, the potential of practice research, because I'm kind of fed up of the narrative that practice is this kind of second cousin, and having been involved in championing practice for quite a long time now through various mechanisms, which I can elaborate on later, but also having sat on the main panel D as an output assessor and an impact assessor for panels 34 and 33, or the other way around, I can't remember which is which. there was so much really good practice, and the ref was really open to recognizing the excellence in practice. So kind of, if there's one takeaway from this talk, it is that practice is really respected within numerous institutional settings that make decisions about our future. So yeah, and I feel that's the message I want you to take away, that this is a really exciting time and a healthy environment, and particularly with the importance of impact, because I think often practice is incredibly impactful, but also that I think public engagement is being incorporated a bit more into the metrics that look at assessing impact, and often practice has really good public engagement. So that's my kind of starting point. The reason I've got this image up is I find it really inspiring, and I kind of want you to take a leap of faith that practice is really important and respected and doable, and you can articulate your practice as research. But there are some things that we can talk about to help people to recognise the research aspects of your practice. So how can I move forward? Yay, is that the next screen? So this is a kind of what I'm talking about a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a little bit about the history of practice research, and then I'm going to talk about where we are now with the current landscape, talk a bit about impact, research funding, a little bit about support, and then maybe end with some provocations to get the discussion going. And I'm not sure if it's actually going to be in that order, but and I also really apologise for the horrible corporate images that I've selected from the internet and without citing them properly, but they're just kind of things that I've sucked into Google Slides just to make it look pretty. So apologies for that. So I just want to start with kind of where we were maybe in 2006-ish, 2005-6, when there was a body called MEXA that incorporated AMPI, which was the, I don't even know what AMPI used to stand for, but it was the Association of Media Practice Educators, got sucked into MEXA. And there was this sense that people who make stuff was being subsumed into the more theoretical subject association. And I got involved at that time as the first practice network chair, because that it was felt that there needed to be a champion for practice with this other body being subsumed into MEXA. And at that time, there was a lot of anxiety around practice and the difference between practice research and industry practice. The lights have just gone out and they've come back on. I've got no control over my environment. And there was a lack of clarity about, is the research in the formal way that you've made something, or is it in the subject matter or content, or does the research have to be about media itself, or can it be that you're using practice to explore another subject? And there was also a tension around the piece of practice and whether or not there had to be a piece of contextualizing writing in order for it to be research. And those anxieties, I think, are still bubbling under, but there's been quite a lot of distance travelled in different places, which I'll talk about a little bit. But there's kind of this historical anxiety around practice and what constitutes practice and whether it's research and all this kind of stuff. And this was from the REF used to be called RAE, Research Assessment Exercise. So this is from a committee review of RAE 2001. A play about suffragettes is that which relates to the discipline of drama rather than research into suffragettes. Work that results purely from creative or professional development of the artist, however distinguished, is unlikely to fulfill the requirements of research. So there was this kind of like, you know, not just anything can be research. It might be professional practice, it might not be research. And there was this is an expression of this anxiety, but I think we've moved away from that. I'm just kind of setting the scene for where I think we are. This is continuing that quote. We do not believe that a creative performance or practice output should be allowed to stand on its own as a record of research activity. Rather, we believe that any research output submitted to the RAE should have associated with it a record or route map of the research process. So there was at this stage a sense that you had to articulate the fact it was research through some form of writing. And that there were lots of arguments that said that wasn't the case, and I think in some disciplines, perhaps more artistic disciplines, it may not be quite the case. But I think in many fields that I'm working in, where we're looking at peer reviewing practice research, there is a written element. There's a written element when you submit it to the ref. There's a written element when you submit a funding bid. So being able to articulate your practice as research through writing is a really, really important skill to use, and I'll come back to that. And then it carried on a scholarly obligation to document and to reflect critically on and review their research processes. This documentation should be required to be presented in verbal written form. So this big push to have some sort of writing, otherwise it wasn't research. And we can have a debate about that, and we can talk about that in the chat. But this was coming from the early days when there were all these anxieties. In about 2005, I put a symposium on when I was at London South Bank University, which is exploring what it all means with the RAE 2008 in mind. And I've just circled in red a paragraph from our kind of call to papers, or the webpage for that. The AHRC suggests that practice-led research should incorporate a scholarly apparatus that enables other researchers to assess the value and significance of the results of the research, and that completed work should have a record or route map of the research process. And the Communication, Cultural and Media Studies panel report on the last RAE exercise valued practice that could give a reflexive account of itself as research, but found that many practitioners did not explain ways in which the work constituted an original investigation in a research context. So these are the anxieties of the early 2000s, and I think some of those may be still lurking in our institutions, but maybe are less prominent in the larger institutions like UKRI and AHRC and the REF panel. But I think sometimes some of the gatekeepers within our own institutions may still be thinking like this and feeling those anxieties. So our job is to make them feel confident that practice research is a valid form, but also to use the tools available to us to be able to articulate our research in a way that they can understand. So where are we now? Things have moved on. I think there have been several iterations of the REF since all this stuff that I've just been talking about, and there's been lots and lots of practice research that has been submitted that has scored very highly, and the AHRC encourages practice submissions. In fact, there used to be a separate practice grant that got taken away, and they accept practice as the normal research grant route. So rather than practice being ghettoized as a separate thing, it's recognised as a methodology that you might want to use in your research bid. So I think we should feel very heartened and excited by that. And yet these anxieties still prevail a little bit. So I feel like there's a need to educate the gatekeepers and submitting institutions and give them the confidence that, you know, this is a respected way of doing things. So more work needs to be done to frame practice of research clearly and confidently. So having confidence. So when I say rebel with a cause, it's just like, yes, we're doing this, we're confident, we believe in what we're doing, that it is research. And what is the definition of research? Does anybody know? Type in the chat what the definition of research is. It's a mantra. New knowledge effectively shared. Research is new knowledge effectively shared. And I think practice can be an incredibly effective way of sharing new knowledge. So we need to be confident about our practice as research, both internally and externally, when we're putting funding applications in, when we're submitting work to the REF, but also when we're getting internal support for our practice. So I'm just going to do a little bit around the REF. Now, obviously, the REF is not the be-all and end-all of research, but it is quite a useful tool to use to hit our institutions on the head to make them support our practice. So practice research is established in our discipline, is recognised as being highly impactful, both by the funding bodies and the such as AHRC. So they have their annual Research in Film Awards. Our subject for my subject association, which is BAFTSS, which is British Association of Film, Television and Screen Studies, I inaugurated the Practice Research Awards, which are ongoing, and so there's recognition for practice as research in my disciplines and in other disciplines. And just to reflect on the report on REF 2021, they reported an increase in world-leading practice research ranging from work of individual researchers through collaborative, socially engaged and applied research co-created with community or professional partners, especially in subpanels 34 and 33. So that is communication and cultural studies and dance, performing arts and film. So there's an increase in world leading. So people are becoming more confident in submitting practice research, and it's being recognised as world leading. So thinking about what makes a successful practice research project, I think there's huge potential in terms of practice research. I think there may still be some barriers, and as I keep saying, often by our submitting institutions or maybe our own self-limiting beliefs, potentially. I want to focus on the positives and really think about the potential of, how practice can be celebrated, recognised, and also what change it can make in the wider community beyond academia. So thinking about impact and stakeholders and beneficiaries in our practice as research, because new knowledge effectively shared doesn't just mean within academia, it can mean more broadly than that. So research excellence, impact and change making is something which I think practice does really, really well, and we should be shouting about it. So I've got a couple more quotes from the REF main panel D overview report. Sorry if I'm looking over here, it's just where my PowerPoint is. So many examples of strong practice research outputs, extended creative practice, a distinctive feature of main panel D research. Practice research submissions were significantly improved in terms of detailing the research dimensions of submitted output. So people are getting better at articulating their practice as research. Another thing which I haven't put in the PowerPoint is there were a number of highly rated practice outputs that were at least the equivalent of a book in terms of the time and sort of ambition of them, that were not double weighted, and the panel encouraged institutions to be much more confident in double weighting strong practice research outputs, because they were losing out on having a double weighted really good output by not doing that. So somebody had a nice definition of research, a systemic directed approach to create original knowledge, which I really like. Okay, so they said the strongest practice research outputs. You want to butt in, Jess?
Sure. I just want to jump in there.
Please do.
Because you've obviously talked at quite a breadth.
Yes.
One of the things that I think probably quite a lot of people are wondering about is how has all of this affected your practice as a filmmaker and director?
Well, I'm going to talk about that in a little while. I'm going to get through this boring part, and I am going to come on to that. But I think that it's had a twofold impact on my own practice. I'm really interested in impact and reaching audiences and audience development and things like that. So it's definitely informed that. But it's also the only way I can get money out of my institution is to say it's going to be leading to something referable, or it's going to be an impact case study. So it's a slightly strategic thing, that it's a tool to help garner time to do stuff. So that's my, in a really honest and blunt way, that's what having sat on the panel, the one thing I would like to say is that you could dismiss it as being a neoliberal kind of bean counting exercise, and in many ways, many people might feel that, but I can really vouch for the people who are involved in the process of assessing research that we are genuinely looking for excellence and celebrating it where we find it. And I hope that's a heartening thing for people to hear, because it is not a bean counting exercise for the people who are actually undertaking it. Okay, it may be for our universities, but it certainly is not. People are really genuinely looking for excellence. We're not trying to catch people out. We're looking for excellence, and where we see it, we want to reward it.
Okay. There's a question just come up, just that's sort of on the back of that, from Freya. You might want to, Freya, if we can just hang on to that until Charlotte's finished talking, because it's actually quite an interesting piece that you put up there. Okay, so
yeah, I'm really interested.
We won't forget you. Okay,
we'll come back to that. So I'm just going to talk for a little bit longer about some things we might need to think about when we're trying to verbalize the research dimensions of our practice. And this is a quote from the panel review. The strongest practice research work characterized by precision, depth and brevity, presenting the research dimensions of the work. And so when you're trying to assess a piece of practice, if you haven't done the legwork of showing us where to find the excellence, we still look for it, but it's more difficult to find it. So the more that you can do to be clear, precise, and add depth to the way that you describe your research, the easier it is to find the excellence, if that makes sense. And I'm going to talk, because my approach to submitting my own practice to the ref, and I'm sorry I'm talking about the ref, but it's just a framework to kind of as a way in to talk about things, is to group things together and to have a kind of this belt and braces approach, which I'll go into more depth. But this idea of a multi-component output might be that you have some sort of practice that you've done, and you have the ability to write a 300-word statement. 300 words is nothing to try and describe the research, but you also have the facility to document the artifact, if it's an artifact, or the exhibition or the event or whatever it is, and provide some supporting materials which help the assessor to see the research dimension. And what I would say, whether or not you're applying to funding or to the ref, it's always a really, really good idea to document your process visually, keep records of things, have a file system on your computer where you gather things, because several times I've tried to collate my own multi-component output or somebody else's, and you're like going, oh no, I'm sure I had that exhibition catalogue, and you're kind of clutching at kind of where did I keep that. So trying to come up with a systematic way of documenting and storing information about your practice is really important, and that means documenting everything, because you don't know which bit of your practice is going to be relevant later on, because you might be submitting something 5-6 years after you actually did it. So getting into a really good habit of documenting the shit out of things, people interacting with your work as well, gathering testimonials of people who've experienced and been moved or changed by your work, because it might become an impact case study, I think is a really good thing to do. Even if you don't think it's important now, it might be later on. So the ref panel said multi-component outputs worked best when the relation between the items submitted was clear. So the way you collate your submission and the way you collate a research bid, being clear and signposting stuff is really, really important. So good signposting, where the summative nature of the submission could be read across all its constituent elements. So the weaker practice submissions might not have all of the stuff that you need, or it's, you know, you click on a link and it doesn't work, or, you know, all those kinds of things, which just, even though you're still going to look for the excellence, because some submitting institutions might not have the clout to pay somebody to finesse a really beautifully formatted PDF, and they shouldn't be penalised for that. You can put things in a Word document in a really clear way. Do you know what I mean? So it's just like getting that balance right. Some people just went all bells and whistles and it was kind of all mouth and no trousers, and it's like, well, it's a really beautiful thing you've submitted, but where's the research element? Yeah, so it's getting that balance right between making it clear how the practice and the supporting materials speak to each other. And that can be done in a Word document. It doesn't have to be all bells and whistles. But if it's just like not clear how they speak to each other, it's just annoying. And then all forms of practice research, in all forms, weaker submissions did not always sufficiently identify or articulate a research dimension in the material submitted, with limitations in critical depth, rigorous process, or research contextualization. So yeah, don't do that. So really critical reflection, situating your practice within a wider body of artistic and theoretical framework, and just contextualizing the research process is really important. And this is a nice quote from, there's a piece about practice research on the AHRC blog. UKRI funding bodies welcome practice research, a thriving research innovation ecosystem. It's a bit corporate, the language, but it's about the fact that practice submissions often have a wider breadth and they cover lots of different formats, and they can draw on lots of different theoretical frameworks. They can do all sorts of things in really interesting ways, and it's how you frame that and contextualize that in research bidding as much as in ref outputs. So I just love that idea of an ecosystem and how your practice isn't happening in a vacuum, which I think is really important to think of yourself and how your practice speaks to the wider field. So coming back to this thing of words, and the argument about words has kind of been one, you have to do some words at the moment in the systems that exist. Just in many, that has, the ref has a 300 word statements. I'm involved in looking after practice submissions to Open Screens. They asked for 1,000 words. I am editor-in-chief of ScreenWorks. These are all kind of screen-based media practice things. They asked for a 2,000 word statement. If you're doing a grant application, there's lots more words than that. So whether it be the ref or a peer-reviewed publication or a funding application, there needs to be the ability to articulate and formulate what it is that you're doing in some sort of word form. So it's almost like, there have been people saying, well, the practice should speak for itself. And maybe that's the case. But, even if you just use the 300 words to describe the research element, it's a useful exercise to do. So thinking about research statements, it is really difficult to assess the research element without that kind of route map. And I've really struggled, even though I'm a champion of practice research, if the information I need is not forthcoming, is not there, it's quite difficult to spot the excellence and to see the the research element. So just going to talk briefly about ScreenWorks. I don't know if anybody has heard of ScreenWorks. I'm not sure what practices you're coming from. Are you from lots of different forms of practice? Maybe you can put in the chat kind of vaguely what milieu you're working in. Are you working with screen-based stuff? Are you working with art stuff? Is it performance? Is it, just let me know. So ScreenWorks is a peer-reviewed journal that publishes screen media practice research. And so we've got interior architecture, cinema audiences, creative writing, so lots of different forms of practice. ScreenWorks was set up by John Dovey, and I was the associate editor at the beginning of the process, and it was a DVD that was published in what was then the Journal of Media Practice, which is now the Media Practice and Education. And so this is how old it is. I think the first issue came out in 2006. And I've published an article with Alex Neville reflecting on where ScreenWorks came and how it's kind of, its life. But the impetus behind it was this anxiety that I mentioned earlier about, well, can it be research if it hasn't been peer reviewed? There's no mechanism for peer reviewing. If you publish a normal article, it's peer reviewed. So we need to create some sort of mechanism for peer review of practice research. And since ScreenWorks has been set up, various other journals have cropped up. So there's JAR, the Journal of Artistic Research, Sightlines, various videographic film criticism, things like In Transition. And they all have different forms. But when ScreenWorks was set up, we felt we had to make the peer review process explicit. And so we would publish the peer reviews, which we still do. But in our version of things, the peer reviews are anonymous. But obviously, often the practice people are not anonymous because their name's on the practice. So it's not double blind peer reviewed. And it's an interesting process, and we've had conversations. I've got an amazing editorial board who are really, really brilliant, and I feel like the journal's going from strength to strength at the moment. But we've had discussions about, well, why are we still publishing the peer reviews? Because we don't, you know, we don't need to prove ourselves anymore. We've kind of done all of that. But sometimes it's just really interesting to see that kind of the journey that the research has gone on from being peer reviewed to responding to the peer review. Some people find that difficult if they've not had a glowing peer review, because we still publish the peer review. We have to work with our peer reviewers to ensure that they're aware that their reviews are going to be published, so they're done in a constructive way. We also have had some instances where peer reviewers have been able to mentor people who've submitted things, and it's been a really positive, constructive experience. And so we do sometimes ask for changes for the actual practice, which is much easier now than when we were doing it on a DVD and it was a done deal. And also when online editing was really expensive and nobody would go back and re-edit a film. People are a little bit more flexible sometimes now if they're kind of solely in charge of it. So the idea behind ScreenWorks is that we have a kind of a pro forma. It's an online form now where we have these headings. So I just put them up on the screen because they might be useful for you if you're at the beginning of this journey, or even if you're not, just to think about, you know, these things have come from the kinds of things that funders and other people need to think about. So research questions, the context, the methods, what outputs have been generated by the research, where has it been disseminated, and what kinds of impact might it have had. And remember the definition of research being contribution to new knowledge and understanding, and the criteria, the REF criteria, but are often used as well in funding bids, this idea of originality, significance and rigor. I'll unpack those in a little while. But these kinds of things are useful things to have in your mind as you're thinking about how you might be writing about your practice as research. How is it original? What is its significance? And how can you demonstrate rigor? Now, what's interesting, in the main panel D, I was doing outputs for panel 33, which is dance, performing arts and film and things like that, drama. We could recognise rigor in the actual formal construction of a piece of practice. So that's really useful for you to know. So if something is really beautifully constructed, there's an element of rigor in the methodology through which it's been made. So it's not necessarily just academic rigor and theoretical frameworks, although we would expect to see some of that context in the way that you write about your research. The rigor can also be recognised in the actual making and the craft. So I think that's quite useful to know. And the other thing I want to talk about is, you know, okay, we do need some words, but how do they function? And for me, the words function in dialogue with the practice. They don't supersede the practice, they don't replace the practice. The practice can stand alone without the words, but through the dialogue with the words is where we see the research element. So I like to think of it as dialogic. So the words you're writing are in dialogue, not replacing your practice. It's supplemental, it's augmenting, it's illuminating, it's situating, it's contextualizing, it's evidencing the researchness and the rigor of your practice. And I think if we think about it like that, it becomes much more playful, it becomes much more exciting as a way of expressing what you were trying to do in your practice, rather than, oh God, I've got to write something that's not fair. I shouldn't have to write anything. My practice stands alone. You see the research. If you let go of that and actually think, actually, I've got this extra space that if you write an article, you don't have an extra load of words to say what you were trying to do in the article. So you've got this extra, it's kind of almost like, you know, it's this wonderful extra space where you can have a dialogue with your practice. And I think if we frame it in that positive way, it can actually become quite exciting to reflect on. And there's a wonderful quote from Lisovich, Barclay and Batty, where they're drawing on Walter Benjamin's theory on translation. And they're talking about the relationship between the creative work and the accompanying written text. And I really, really like this. We argue for a relationship between screen work and written text that illuminates both works. Okay, Benjamin says it's the task of the translator not only to illuminate what is dormant in the original, but also to break through the decayed barriers of his own language, to illuminate a little more of what has remained hidden. Benjamin's talking about translation and the dialogue between the original and the translation. This is surely the task of the practitioner researcher also, to break through established boundaries within which we practice and how we speak about the practice. The practitioner researcher must allow their practice to be powerfully affected by their exegetical writing and must expand and deepen their practice. So they're quoting Benjamin there. And I really love this idea of that dance between the practice and the writing. And if you're in the process of having to write about your research, think about choreographing that relationship between the two. So if you're doing a ref portfolio, it's a long way off. It's 2029, so it seems like a long way off. Make sure you're gathering all that supporting documentation. So there's the 300-word statement. There's the output itself. So you can document the output itself, and then there's some supporting documentation which might show the research notes that maybe you've disseminated at a conference. Maybe it's informed the field. Maybe people have changed their practice because of what you've done. So any evidence of public engagement, festival distribution, exhibition in an art gallery. You might have done an associated publication in a peer-reviewed journal. There might be some websites or research blog where you've talked about your process. You might have some external reviews or testimonials about your practice. Start gathering that stuff sooner rather than later, because it might be useful later on if you decide to submit to the ref or as ammunition for a funding bid or something like that. So I'm going to talk about my practice now. Sorry, Jez, I've taken a long time to get to it, but I hope it makes sense. So ages ago for RAE 2008, I submitted a film that I made when I wasn't an academic, because I re-entered the academy. I had been an academic, then I worked in the industry and freelanced. I made this as an independent filmmaker, and I went back into the academy, and I submitted this short film. It's called Bluebell. It's it's a rape narrative. It's a 7-minute film, so I submitted a DVD. It had a website, which is a screen grab of, but I had this kind of absolute insecurity about, could it be research? Partly because it wasn't made explicitly as a research outcome when I made it. So I had this belt and braces approach, and I wrote a peer-reviewed article in the Journal of Media Practice reflecting on it. The process of writing that article was really, really interesting for me. I really, really recommend critically writing about your own practice, because you just learn so much about what you didn't even know you were doing at the time. And I was able to situate what I was doing within a wider critical framework. I think, it's just a useful process. But it came from a place of insecurity, of kind of thinking, oh, it's not really research because I didn't make it when I was at university. But it was research. I'd done a PhD. I am a researcher. There were research questions, but they weren't framed as research questions when I made them. So it had festival distribution, a number of short film festivals, but I also made an effort to talk about it at conferences. And again, talking about your research, when you submit your film to a film festival, nobody talks about it. They might come and chat to you in the bar afterwards, but there's no opportunity to say, well, you don't get to stand up and say anything about it. So actually talking about your research at an academic conference is actually a really brilliant thing. Again, it goes back into your practice. It makes you really critically reflect on why you were doing the thing that you were doing. So I really recommend that. So I submitted a portfolio of all of those things. And if you think about it, yes, it's a 7-minute film, but it's got a peer-reviewed article. So it's almost like you have to do like 5 times as much as somebody who's just written an article. And this is only seen as one output. So there's a slight dilemma there. But this is, I continue to have this belt and braces approach because I can't get myself out of it because of my own imposter syndrome, I guess. So for the next ref, I submitted another portfolio of things that was a completely changed direction in the intervening however many years. And so what I submitted for this was a portfolio of stuff that was grouped around my work around cinema history. So one of the things I made was the Curzon Memories app, which is a smartphone heritage app that is based at the Curzon Cinema in Clevedon. And it used GPS locative, content triggered by your location on the exterior of the cinema. and QR codes on the interior of the cinema. So this is like 2012, so it's quite early. Like QR codes are just really old hat now, but at the time it was like really cutting edge. And that involved oral history. So I was recording memories of people that used to go to the cinema, including people like Julia Elton, Lady Julia Elton, who was the daughter of the GPO, what's his name, Elton. And, you know, people ranging in age, you know, from really young people to older people. Those films got edited together and shown in the cinema on the 100th anniversary of the cinema, because the cinema would have opened the weekend the Titanic crashed. It sunk. But they didn't open that weekend because of the tragedy. But their first opening night raised money for victims and survivors of the Titanic. So it was the 100th year anniversary. I did a research blog, and I can't recommend that enough, because it held me to account to think about my practice as I was going along. And I haven't got a current research blog, and it's something I would really like to reconstitute at some stage, because I really enjoyed thinking out loud. I don't think anyone read it, but it just made me feel like, I don't know, it helped me to think by having to think out loud. So I submitted the Curzon Memories app itself. I did an academic poster that won the prize at the MEXA conference. I gave a conference paper at the EVA, I don't know what it stands for, it's like a computing conference, and that was published in the conference proceedings. I won a Learning on Screen award. There's a research blog. There's the official website of the app itself. I disseminated at academic conferences, and then I had video documentation of user testing and the launch. So what I put in was a big kind of body of work, a portfolio of work around what I was exploring, which was really, how can emerging technologies help us to understand cinema history and the emergence of a new technology at the time? Because when the cinema was first built, it was in the very early days of purpose-built cinemas. So that was my practice research. So you can see, very similar, belt and braces, throwing everything at it, having to write an article as well. I don't think you have to do that. That's just the way that I do it. Okay, so you don't feel Charlotte, you have to do that. Yeah,
just a quick interruption, because this won't wait until the end.
Go for it.
Sarah Houghton has asked, are there any issues about publishing your research on a blog?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't think
happy
so.
With that, Sarah?
Do you want to ask me, what do you mean by issues?
No, that's just what she's written. I don't know. Sarah, do you want to join in?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can
Go
hear
ahead,
me.
Sarah.
Yeah, I've got a blog, and I've shared it with my supervisors because I'm a PhD student as well. But I'm always a bit anxious about sharing stuff, because I found out things in my research about, I'm doing stuff about the Portsmouth suffragettes, and I found things out that I know haven't been published before. And I'm putting on an exhibition next year where all will be revealed. But I don't know, I feel a little bit awkward about, do I share this? Can someone else?
Somebody could plagiarize it.
Yeah.
I think if you want to protect the findings until they've been officially published, then you might want to be a bit circumspect about it. But I've had an academic book that has been published be plagiarized and available on Amazon, like literally word for word. So there's nothing really to protect you from that. So I would, if you gave a paper at an academic conference, that has a limited audience, doesn't it? But people could still borrow your ideas. So I would you can think out loud in a speculative way without necessarily revealing everything, and you can maybe develop an audience for the publication by saying, oh my god, went to the archive today, found this amazing piece of information, I can't share it until I've published.
I've been doing that on Instagram. I've got like all the things I'm making for it as well. I've been putting up bits, but not the fun thing. So it's just really,
when you're ready to publish it, put a link to it, and then you can reveal all, and then there's a kind of a publication date kind of. I think if you're doing something that's really cutting edge that hasn't been disseminated in a more peer, and if you're planning to do peer review, if you're not planning to do peer review, then why not reach an audience through a blog? It's up to you to. I can't make that decision. I mean, it's a long time since I did this, so it's over 10 years ago. and I can't really remember, but I was just like really excited because I was, sharing the way my user testing and things like that. So it wasn't necessarily something that anybody could steal or replicate because it was my practice. But I think it's a really good question. It's just something that you'll have to trust your instincts on. Are there any other questions? Because I know I'm just blathering on.
Not that have come up on the question. Oh, somebody's put their hand up here. Go ahead, Lee.
Hello, hi. So I'm worried about online publication as well. So what I'm doing is I am writing a novel that explores certain themes, and those themes I am exploring through my own original artwork, which I then am hoping to upload to Instagram to kind of gauge audience response. And also the book that I am writing has illustrations, which I am producing. And it's just the issue of, if something goes online, is that then published and therefore can't form part of the thesis, or maybe have issues when it comes to actually securing a proper publication. So there's two images. There's ones that may go in the book, and there's ones that are just part of my research, allow me to explore the theme. Is it okay for that to go out online?
I don't really understand how PhDs work, and whether you can include things like, if your research question is how does engaging with an online audience help develop writing practice, then presumably you can, because that's part of your research question. But I don't know exactly how. And also I think you can include things in appendices, can't you, that have been published occasionally. I don't know the answer to that, but
I'm going to butt in here because I've got experience here on this, Lee, going through not a dissimilar thing that you're going through, but from the other end. And the publisher of the book that I'm involved in writing at the moment is very strict on having stuff that hasn't been published at all before. So I think you need to be just aware of that some publishers are very funny about it, and other publishers need to know that it's already been done. So if you've got a publisher lined up, it's probably worth checking out. If not, just like Charlotte saying, document it so that it's already out there. It's not out there, but you've got control of it. Otherwise, does that make sense?
It does, yes. Thank you.
Okay,
yeah.
Great. Okay.
So, like, the only thing I can compare it to is like if somebody tweets something about the Cary Grant Festival, I might do a screen grab of their tweet, because what I'm interested in is how fans interact with the festival. So I have to then ask permission of that person to use their image in my research. So it's like the flip side of what you're talking about. But yeah, I think it depends how you're using it, because images can be used in different ways. So I'm just going to move on and talk about what I'm up to at the minute. So that's kind of a vomit of my research interest at the minute. And I'm kind of really interested in placemaking and identity. And Jez and I were just kind of talking about that at the beginning before people arrived. So I've got twin passions. My PhD was on Angela Carter, and she spent some time in Bristol in the 1960s. She lived here for nearly 10 years and wrote 5 of her novels here. And Cary Grant is obviously the Hollywood star. He was born here as well. They both have Bristol connections. And I think my interest in their connections to Bristol is possibly more to do with my love of Bristol. And I was born here, and I find it endlessly fascinating. And I was involved with initiating Bristol's bid to become a UNESCO Creative City network member as a city of film. And I'm the co-founder of the Angela Carter Society, and I run the Cary Grant Festival. But all of the work that I do is around kind of thinking about Bristol as a city, as a geography, has informed these artists and their development. As part of that, with some funding from the Being Human Festival, I developed the Looking for Archie walking tour. And I've talked about the screen. So as well as the Curzon Memories app, I've developed a app called The Lost Cinemas of Castle Park. So how I came on to doing the Cary Comes Home Festival is I found out that Cary Grant used to go to the Clare Street Picture House with his mother. That's where he learnt to use a pastry fork. and he heard early sound films from Edison's kinetophone in 1914, before sound came into the cinema in the 1920s. And I found out that some of his films screened at the Hippodrome, which is a massive massive theatre in Bristol that still operates. And he had a relationship with them, and I was just really fascinated. Like, wouldn't it be amazing to show his films on the big screen in the Hippodrome again? So having never done anything of that scale, I thought it would be a good idea to hire a 2,000-seater theatre and put on a double bill. You must never do a double bill because it splits your audience now. So much learning. But the Cary Grant Festival came directly out of my passion for Bristol cinema history. So what's happening now is I have worked with a local theatre company called Show of Strength to develop the Looking for Archie walking tour into an actor-led theatre walk. So my tour was like a very didactic kind of this, tour of the city centre, and Show of Strength's version is much more narrative and speculative and exciting. And that was piloted at last year's Being Human Festival and is rolling out in Easter. So I'm really interested in place and identity and what it meant for Cary Grant to grow up in Bristol, and what it means for Bristolians growing up today that somebody could grow up here and become one of the most, iconic male leads in Hollywood cinema. I'm kind of exploring writing a monograph about Cary Grant's stardom, mobilities and place. So really thinking about how he can be a really interesting figure to explore the idea of mobility, not only in terms of his physical mobility through the geography of Bristol and then emigrating to America, but also how his image circulated when he was making films and how it still circulates digitally today, because people are posting his image every single day. But I've just applied for 2 fellowships to work on that book, both of which haven't been successful. So I think I'm going to pivot. I'm still going to do everything that I want to do around the Cary Comes Home Festival. So really, we do a festival weekend every 2 years, but I put events on throughout the year, which are kind of screenings, expanded screenings, where people are invited to dress up in vintage clothing. And there's live music, and to really explore what cinema going might have meant at the time when his films first came out, or when he was going to the cinema in Bristol. So my research, I'm still going to do all of that, but I haven't got any money or time to do it, so I don't know quite how. But I think I'm going to develop another interest of mine, which is around climate content. And so I run the Albert Educational Partnership, as teaching my students about sustainable filmmaking, but a really strong part of that is thinking about, challenging them to put climate on screen in ways that are not really didactic, scientific, hitting you on the head and making you feel guilty, but in more poetic, esoteric ways, and what that might mean, and what kind of a toolkit might you put in place to encourage really interesting ways of putting climate on the screen. And that's potentially where I'm going to head in future, because I don't think there's any money in Cary Grant. But anyway, I'm just telling you that. I'm going to say a little bit about what I submitted to the ref, and I'm going to show you my ref portfolio so you can see what I submitted. So it's my ref portfolio. Okay, so it's about Cary Comes Home Festival as curatorial practice. So I have a little table of contents explaining where to find everything. So there's a 300-word statement, the output, documentation, and then list of supporting evidence. I kind of separate those out. So the statement, I don't think it's very good, but they're just really difficult to write. So this multi-component, I won't read it out. You can probably read it. I don't know if you can. If it's too small, I can read it out if you want me to. But I'm trying to talk a little bit about the research process and then the research insights to try and situate what I think I'm doing within a wider context of film festival studies, staff studies, fan pilgrimage, and cinematic tourism. So talking about it as curatorial practice, as well as describing what it is that I think that I'm doing. And then I've got a little table of contents for the list of output. So there's the festival itself, so 4 iterations of a biennial festival, fringe events that happen in what I call fallow years, and the Looking for Archie walking tour. So since this, the other things have come in, the theatre walk has happened. And so I'm trying to, these are the 4 iterations of the festival, and then I go through them one by one with a little bit of information about each one. So the first one was at the Hippodrome, we had the red carpet, we had a choir singing, and yeah, it was fun. We also had the big act, which is a local kids theatre group that reenacting Archie Leach's journey to becoming Cary Grant. And we did a film competition for a 90-second film inspired by North by Northwest, which is one of the films that we screened. People dressed up. We had prizes for the best dressed. And there's a video documentation, which I don't think I'll play because we've run out of time. And yeah, just kind of let me go on another video documentation of that iteration. And then this is the next festival where we showed Bringing Up Baby, where he plays a paleontologist looking for his bone under the dinosaur exhibit at Bristol Museum. So this idea of expanded cinema and trying to, we did a festival in July in the middle of the Bristol Harbour Festival, which is just completely stupid because everyone's going to the Harbour Festival, but people still came. So loads of learning. So the Cary Grant statue is in Millennium Square, which is where the Harbour Festival happens. And we had a stall there, and we had like people doing a swing dance and things like that at that venue. Oh my God, we were just doing too many different things. So that's documentation of that. And then the 2018 festival, we showed a documentary called Becoming Cary Grant at Glenside campus of Bristol, which is the former site of Bristol Lunatic Asylum where Cary Grant's mother was committed. And we had Professor David Nutt, who's a psychopharmacologist, because the film uses Cary Grant's experimentation with LSD as a mechanism to flash back to his life. And so we're very interested in thinking about mental health and what that means in contemporary society, because it's only recently been able to be experimented upon, and people are finding that it's actually in small doses very helpful for depression and things like that. So we had a panel with the director of the film, Professor David Nutt, the person who runs Glenside Hospital Museum, Mark Clancy, who's written the definitive biography of Cary Grant, who was a contributor for the film. And just to go back up, that is Elsie Leach, Cary Grant's mother, on the screen in what would have been the recreational auditorium where, as a patient, she would have spent her time. So I think there's lots of things going on in moving beyond just, oh, let's celebrate Cary Grant, he was really good looking, to really thinking about what it meant for him to grow up in Bristol at the turn of the century. And we had like UE illustration students doing live reportage drawing and blah, blah. And then it had a Hitchcock theme. And I've written an article about this subsequently, which I didn't write in time for the ref, but we'll go into the next ref presumably, unless I write loads of other brilliant things. And in it, I reflect on that tension between getting bums on seats and showing the populist things like Hitchcock that everyone wants to go to see, and actually curating stuff that bringing stuff to audiences that they might not normally see, or raising awareness about aspects of Cary Grant's life that they might not be aware of. And that's a kind of a balancing act in my curatorial practice. So yes, I think we showed North by Northwest, people dressed up again and enjoyed that. And we also showed some screwball comedies, which is another aspect of him, which both of these, Talk of the Town and His Girl Friday, supersede that kind of darkness that Hitchcock recognised in Cary Grant in films like Suspicion. So he's not quite such a nice character in these films. And we did stuff like at the Bristol Avon Gorge Hotel, where he used to go and stay and is pictured here. This gentleman below was there when that photograph of Cary Grant was being set up, because he worked there as a lad. And then fans, two of these people in the bottom right were from America, came and recreated the photo. So this idea of fandom and screen tourism is another aspect that I reflect on. And these are interviews with these people from America about what drew them to come all the way to Bristol. So yeah, it's it's taking too long, so I could go through it, you know. Then it went online in 2020. So I've got documentation of that. I did, with the video essay podcast, I did a call for contributions about Journeys of Cary Grant, which is the theme of the festival in 2020. And Will de Gravio hosted this kind of Q&A with all the people who contributed. And then this is the fringe. This is still the output. This isn't even the documentation. So these are all the other events. This is like the first event we ever did to raise awareness about the festival. We did a drink-along screening of Notorious in a wine cellar where Hitchcock, we know, have a letter from Hitchcock. We know he bought his wine there. Bishop's Wife in the cathedral, and there's a picture of Cary Grant on top of the cathedral. That's Col Needham, the head of IMDb, who sponsored the event. We took it to Hanover, which is Bristol's twin city. The BFI did a season, and I was acknowledged in it. So there's loads of documentation. That's the Looking for Archie Walking tour. Supporting evidence. So this is conference presentations, a draft of the journal article, which I didn't publish in time, a blog post for the Performance and Stardom SIG, testimonials, press coverage, me being on TV, other coverage, social media, people interacting with it, the website, Crowdcast channel, screen tourism. So yeah, that's Visit Bristol and Visit Britain. So I'll shut up because that was a bit too much information, but I'm just kind of showing you I'm still doing the bloody belt and braces, and this was submitted as a double weighted output, and that was upheld. Nobody knows what their outputs get. So yeah, and I'm just gonna really quickly wrap up if I'm able to.
Yeah, that's fine. Just fire away. I'm sure there's going to be quite a lot of questions. So
I just got to get back to where I was.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got another thing where I'm developing a feature film that's based on adaptation of Angela Carter's Japanese writings with a writer called Scott James Bassett. It's had BFI development funding, and I've written a peer-reviewed academic article. And I don't quite know what to do with this. I don't think the practice itself will be refable. I don't really know what I'm doing with this, but potentially it could be an output. And the article is in the Journal of Contemporary Women's Writing. So I guess what I'm trying to model is I still suffer from that anxiety of having to throw everything at it and doing belt and braces. I don't think you have to do that necessarily. And lots of really good practice didn't do this level of documentation. I think this could have been an excessive burden for whoever had the misfortune to assess it, the previous thing that I was showing you. So I don't think you need to do that. I'm not necessarily saying that you do need to do that. However, the process of critically writing about and reflecting on your practice is a really good thing to go through, and I really recommend it. So the belt and braces tactic has pros. It offers a route map for the research. If you collate it in a way that's really clear and easy to navigate, that can be really helpful for people. It gives you an opportunity to get feedback on your work, and it enables the kind of researchness to accrue to your practice. So those are the pros. And the cons are that you have to do 5 times as much as everyone else. I don't think you have to, but I always still feel like I have to because I've got imposter syndrome. And that doesn't seem fair in relation to, just writing something. And then I've talked about this a little bit, but certain tools, I use Awesome Screenshot. You can grab a whole website because quite often your work might be featured on something, but that website will disappear by the time you want to collate it for the ref. So use Awesome Screenshot to screen grab any reference to your work or social media interaction, that kind of thing. You can make websites into a PDF. It can turn a blog into a PDF with lots of different pages. So we just ended up, we used PowerPoint as a container to submit, and that was converted into a PDF that was submitted for the ref. My colleague explored all sorts. So he was going to do something on Prezi, and then he was going to do some really interactive PDF, really complicated thing. But we just felt like we just needed to keep it simple and that people needed to understand where stuff was. Some people submitted a USB drive, and then that USB drive was sent to assessors, and it was just digital stuff that we could have accessed digitally, and it felt like a waste of energy. But then some people submitted a document that had links to things on their repository, and that was a bit irritating because it wasn't embedded in one document, and you had to keep going off to a different platform. So just think about, if you were assessing it, I mean, I know I'm talking about the ref, and the ref is not the be all and end all, honestly, but that's what I've ended up doing. So sorry. But yeah, enable them to evaluate it without necessarily having to link to lots of other things. And then I really like this idea of research patina. You know, when you put yogurt on a piece of what's the metal? Is it brass?
Copper.
Copper, thank you. So you put yogurt on copper and it gets this kind of like verdigris and it develops. So I like this idea that your practice kind of like accrues researchness by this layering of different ways of disseminating it and engaging with audiences. Now things are changing with the way the new ref is going, and people who are research active are divorced from the outputs, and don't ask me, I don't really fully understand it at the moment. But this idea of you know, just thinking about how you can create that patina of researchness that speaks to originality, significance and rigor, and also how your research speaks to wider audiences outside of academia. That's the exciting thing, which I'm just going to end on, and then we can have a conversation. So we've talked about the definition of research as new insights effectively shared, significance, originality and rigor. You know, I think most people know what those things mean, but how significant is it? How new is it, and how rigorous is it? And then I think these things at the bottom are more for the institution, recognition, influence and benefit. And so the ref panels are searching for directions, so give them directions. And then last couple of tips, I think I've over prepared, I'm so sorry. So demonstrate how your output contributes to new knowledge, avoid jargon, show your critical reflection to exhibit the rigor, and try and demonstrate why your research is significant with evidence rather than just making claims.
Okay.
I think that's quite important. And then structure it so they know where to find stuff. That's the same for research applications as well, funding applications. Make it accessible. So we were looking at, I looked at 300 outputs. So if you make it easy for me to find stuff, I'll like it. I'll be happier. And it will just also, if you make it accessible, it will reach a wider audience. So I think, or there are levels of different ways of communicating to different audiences, but that there should be some that are more accessible, if that makes sense. So you might be publishing something about your practice in a really specific journal about fine print making, but there could be a version of that which is more accessible to an audience that doesn't know the technologies that you're talking about. And it, like, I can't stress this enough. Your research and your practice must come from a place of passion that you're really genuinely interested in, and not what you think a research funder wants or what you think the ref wants. It has to, because it will shine through and we can see immediately if you're doing, you know, it has to be something, a place of knowledge and a place of passion and a place of really wanting to make that, because that will make a better piece of research, and you can't second guess what people want. So yeah, and I think it's really, really important. That said, obviously you can see where are there gaps, what's more likely to be funded, where are my interests intersecting with that. And then just to finish, I think practice is really, really, really impactful, and that's why it's so exciting, and that's why it's a rebel with a cause, because I think you can make change through your work in a way that writing an academic article just can't do to the same extent. So it's really, really important to hold on to that. And, you know, that's been recognised by the ref. And I really like this from Prague, UK, the Practice Research Advisory Group. I don't know why the formatting has gone like that. Practice of research is set apart by new ways of conceptualising the research process. So they're saying it's a more diverse way to engage with research. And I think that's another take home. And I think I'm done.
Hey.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, it's just my PowerPoint.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. We have got quite a few questions and comments. The first one, where we have to go right back to the beginning, actually, is from Freya van der Boom, who's a guest. but she was wanting to know if, and I don't know how we're going to do this, I could take advice on this, but if there are any people affiliated with UK institutions who would be interested in supporting my research for a funding bid. So she's doing some interesting work with AI futures in Japan.
Oh, and she's got an email address in the chat. I don't know, Freya, are you still here? I think she might have gone.
No, she's gone, but she has got an email. So if somebody wants to pick that up, please do. I'm just really aware of the time. The other in lots of comments about film production and film making and working with Screenworks. There is Orson has asked, why wouldn't the practice be referable? You mentioned.
Yeah, sorry, that was one specific. Hi, Charlotte. Thanks a lot. Brilliant
Hi,
talk.
Orson. Thank you.
Thanks for the talk, and just thanks for everything. I was just wondering about you. So you mentioned it specifically, I think, with regards to the Angela Carter film project, that you thought that wouldn't be referable, the practice.
I think it's because I haven't made the film. I want to make the film, so the script doesn't feel, it's a collaboration. I initiated the idea. It's come from my initial concept, but the script writer's written it, so I don't feel I have complete ownership of it. And I just want to make the film, and it's slightly stalled by the options run out and we haven't been able to renew it. And yeah, so I'm just feeling, I don't know. I feel like the article I've written about it is brilliant. So that could just be referable on its own, where I'm reflecting on the process of being through the BFI funding gatekeeping process, which is quite interesting. And the challenge of adapting a writer like Angela Carter, who does these amazing kind of literary gymnastics with when you're being supported, and there's a tension between wanting to honour her narrative style in the filmmaking and a funder that's kind of wanting it to be a biopic. Kind of like the tension between, do you know what I mean? So I've written an article which I think is referable, but I don't know whether it would be returned to ours or to an English, language and literature panel. But yeah, I don't know about the script. I think it's because I really want to make the film and I haven't, so I feel like a failure.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a hard one, isn't it, really? I was just curious about what you felt the criteria were with regards to that and what was submissible.
Yeah, I mean, I think potentially it is referable as a script. The script is still in process. It's still a draft. So like the current version, I haven't worked on it since, I don't know. I've been working on it for so long, I've lost track of time. So I'm not sure if like the current iteration of the script was in the last ref round. So there's another reason for that, but yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. So the question, you've gone muted, Jez.
Sorry, mea culpa. Right, so Agatha, thank you, Orson. That was really great. And I think that could probably go further if we had more time. Agatha asks, given the impressive number of outputs for the projects that we heard about, which were a lot, was it all pre-planned, or has some of it happened organically, or did you just project the work as particular projects, or did you just add them up? If you sort of see what she's saying.
It wasn't pre-planned, it's just happened organically. And because I failed to finish writing a peer-reviewed article, which would have been an output, it was like, well, this is my double-weighted output, this is my two outputs, by just throwing everything at it. But since the previous ref, when I did the Curzon Memories app, I have got quite good at collating information. So I did have all of that information to hand, but it was quite a time-consuming kind of trying to shape it into a narrative that made sense, and to really clearly try and signpost what is this disparate collection of events and activities. and is it practice research, or is it just a how can it be practice research? I tried to make the case for it kind of intersecting between festival studies, stardom, fandom, and screen tourism, but it was not pre-planned, and I don't really work like that. I tend to accidentally make things that are quite impactful and then reflect on them afterwards, but it's just I just do what I want, which I recommend.
Okay, so there's another question, but just to add into that, so when do you know when you've finished all this? Because you were saying at the beginning with your ref that it has to be very concise, and it seemed to go
yeah, I think
very
I probably
wide.
did too much. Yeah,
Okay.
I think I wouldn't do that again, having reviewed other people's ones. I think it was a bit OTT. But, if somebody's reading a book, which is a double weighted output, that will take a long time for them to read. And like what I just presented to you, which I whizzed through, wouldn't take as long as it would take to read a book. So, yeah, I don't know. I think all I can say from my own perspective is like I do things that I'm passionate about, that I think are important. And then when it comes to the ref, I kind of try and find a way to harness that. I'm not, and that's why I'm not necessarily I'm trying to change that and be more strategic and put funding bids together and kind of get what I'm doing supported by time and money, but I haven't been hugely successful about that just yet, but I'm getting better at that in terms of actually putting funding bids in. Great, thanks. We've got 2 more questions that will just come in. Corina Downing. Yeah. Corina Downing. Critical writing. What roles for key collaborators did you work with on the most recent Carry Fest? So the most recent Carry Fest was 2022, and we did it on the theme of class. And I'm really interested in Archie Leach growing up as a working class boy and then becoming Cary Grant, who represents high society, and that kind of dichotomy between Archie and Cary. So I have people who help me to do the festival. So I have a festival coordinator who is wonderful and works full time, and this is kind of like a side project for her. And we get a bit of funding from the BFI, pitch pot and things like that. Then I bring in really interesting people to introduce films, and then more recently, so I'm still working on the Cary Grant Festival. It's an ongoing project. So working with Show of Strength Theatre Company has been a really amazing experience, because they've just brought a different sensibility and a different dimension to what was a very good but quite didactic walking tour, and brought it to life with performance. And so I'm exploring the impact of that collaboration on because they've got a slate of theatre walks based on different Bristol histories. And so I'm just very interested to see whether the Cary Grant one takes off, whether it's something sustainable for them. And the idea is that take some of the burden off me and my festival coordinator in keeping the festival alive in fallow years, because there's a 2-way dialogue. And I think that's a strategy I'd like to use more of, because I don't really have capacity to, it's just me and one other person who works full time. And I feel like it's got a bigger punch than the actual amount of people working on it. And I feel to make it sustainable, I need to reach out to other people that are doing stuff. So I think collaboration is really key strategy. But the main thrust of what I'm doing with it now is, as a result of the 2022 festival, which is on the theme of class, we introduced a pay what you can afford sliding ticket style, which included free tickets. So you didn't have to pay if you couldn't afford it, and pay it forward tickets. So if you were loaded, you could pay it forward and support somebody that couldn't come. And we could only introduce that in venues that we had control over the box office. So some of the venues we worked with didn't want to do that. But what I now need to do is, not more people did the pay it forward than did the free ticket, because I didn't communicate it to people in a kind of co-curated participatory way. It was like, look at this amazing event I'm doing, here's a free ticket, and they don't know anything about it. So it's that kind of shifting the audience development to something that is actually making something that people want to go and see, that's relevant to them, speaks to their experience. So the strategy for doing that is potentially to work with Circa Media, which is a local circus company, because the theme of this coming year's festival is about Cary Grant as an acrobat. And he started with the Pender Troupe of Knockabout Boys, and he toured the UK and emigrated to America. So I want to work with their youth circus, and that's based in St Paul's, which is quite an underserved area of Bristol, and use that as a way to co-curate some performance elements with young people, to broaden and diversify our audience, both in terms of age, but also younger people in Bristol are just generally more diverse anyway.
Okay.
So,
okay, thanks a lot.
Great, thanks. I'm sorry to sort of push you because we've got a couple more people. Lee Jane asks, how systematic do you, and I've also got Nick Barrow, who also wants to, I haven't forgotten you, Nick.
oh, sorry, I didn't know I was still sharing it, mate.
Hello?
Yeah, I've stopped sharing the screen.
That's okay, that's fine. So Lee Jane asks, how systematic do you need to be with the documenting process when making a film? And then we've got 2 more questions after that, so if it could be as concise as possible. Well,
I always think images of you in action making the film are just a good thing to gather if you can. If you can get a student to document you on set, it's always a good, that you can't have enough of that, just not just for research, just for your own practice. I just think that's really, really important. But it depends what your practice is. And I just think, you know, I'm using the phrase document the shit out of things. That's what I tell my students. It's just really important to have a record of it, because you know, you don't know what you're doing at the time and how important it is. So I do think it's really, really important. And even documenting your pre-production process, which you might think is really, really boring, but I've been working on the Angela Carter project since, so initially I wrote an academic article about her Japanese writings, which was published in 2006. I finished my PhD in 1998, and that was part of my PhD that didn't fit in the PhD. And I published my PhD in 2003. I published this article in 2006 about her Japanese writings, which is an academic article. And then I wasn't finished with it, and I had to make this piece of practice. And it developed from a kind of a short film idea into a collaboration with Scott, the writer. And I feel I could have documented that journey, because that's, you know, that's nearly a 20-year journey with this piece of work. Better, because I misremember the different iterations. Like, we first approached the estate of Angela Carter and they rejected it because they thought it was too autobiographical, and we changed it and we went back, but that took us 2 years to gather the courage to go back. And then after they let us develop a treatment, we went and we got the option, and then we, you know, there's all these stages, and I don't think I've documented that enough, but I tried to go back over it as I was writing this article, which is in the Journal of Contemporary Women's Writing. So I think you can never document stuff enough, and I really encourage people to document, diarise, journal it, and visibly document it. And then if anyone interacts with your work, document that as well.
Okay, thanks. That's right. Are you happy with that, Lee Jane?
Yes, brilliant. It's just that there are a lot of moving parts, aren't there, like you say. So I'm trying to document as much, and then I wanted this to sort of figure out how much is enough. I suppose never really, isn't it?
Well, you never know what's going to be useful, and like if there's a screening of your work, like get some vox pops from audiences, or you know that's also really useful.
Okay, I'm looking at the time. I'm going to have to
slide
Nick in, who's been waiting very patiently.
Oh, he's got his hand up.
With his hand up. So,
sorry.
By the way,
up,
Nick,
yes.
you've got 3 minutes.
Hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
Wonderful, such an interesting and diverse kind of talk. Really, really helpful. I was just thinking, listening to it, I wish I'd known all of this when we were in the last ref, because we had so many debates trying to second guess what would go in a portfolio, what would not, what would go in the 300 words. So my kind of question is, is this being fed back to information that's coming to universities? Because we didn't know some of the stuff. We were trying to second guess this stuff, and and we were told one thing and not, and and I wish actually I'd been able to put a portfolio in. Well, the option was there to put a portfolio in, but it was kind of like, it's either a big portfolio, and that's mainly because you're if you're curating something, but for a film it's best to just stick with 300, and actually I couldn't put all the detail in I wanted, and so now this is
Yeah,
a revelation.
When I put so I was the internal ref lead at UE putting our practice portfolios together, and I hadn't been on the ref panel when I did that, so I was second guessing it. But I had been an external assessor for a university, and so I'd looked at their draft submissions. Just the process of looking at another university's draft submissions was really interesting, because I would get like, well, why haven't they put that? So that made me realise what an assessor would be looking for. So I didn't know any of this stuff about the ref. I hadn't been an output assessor when I invented that particular container. And as I say, there's another colleague who's a lead on a different UOA, and we were tasked with kind of like coming up with some sort of container. And I made a really boring PowerPoint that he knew exactly where to find everything, and he was trying to make this really whiz-bang thing. And I'm not sure why he ended up using the similar. I think maybe we just had to be the same across all our. I don't know what it is, but we've used this really boring PowerPoint, which was then made into a PDF. But I didn't know any of that information that came from. So I would recommend, if you are invited to be an external assessor for another university, it's a really good experience, because you will then go, oh, why didn't they put that? I needed to know that. And then that will make you know what you might be looking for. And so just think of the audience. So this is whether it's ref, whether it's a funding application, really think, and maybe get yourself on the AHRC peer review college as well, so you can review some funding applications, because it's really helpful to know what works and what doesn't work through the experience of trying to assess it.
That's brilliant.
Great.
Thank you.
Run out of time.
Obviously, that's sort of, in summing up now, we're extremely grateful to you, Charlotte. It's been absolutely brilliant and fascinating, and I think we could spend another hour blethering on to each other at least. Obviously, the main thing that and I'm sure everybody else is going to take from this is DSOT, which is your document the shit out of everything, of everything. Or DSOE, depending on which side you want to sit on it. But the important thing I think that we all need to take is that these bits of information that people have experienced through their own participation and decision making and influence on their own practice that Charlotte has shown us, means that the rest of us also have the opportunity to see that, because sometimes being a rebellious researcher is quite scary and quite an unsure path. So thank you so much, Charlotte. And we look forward to speaking with you again some other time. If you can